Hello, everyone. We're just letting everyone in, and we'll just give everyone a couple of minutes to arrive and get settled, and then we'll make a start. Okay, everyone. So thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the Fair School Admissions Hub. So just to introduce myself to start, my name's Charlotte O'Regan, but only Charlotte if I'm in trouble. It's Charlie the rest of the time. I'm the school engagement lead here at the Sutton Trust, and I'm going to be hosting this webinar, talking you through our Fair School Admissions Hub. So just a little bit of kind of rules around the session and what's going to happen. So in today's webinar, we're going to start by talking about our research and what the research is saying about school admissions, why school admissions is such an important issue. Then I'm going to talk you through our specific evidence base and the evidence we've collected over the last 20 years that have informed both our policy stance on admissions, but also the resources that we've produced and kind of everything that sits behind the hub. As part of that, I will show you some of the elements of the hub and kind of point you to different resources that might be helpful. And then we're going to talk about the Fair School Admissions Pledge, which is our online CPD module. And I'll show you where that is and how you might think about using that resource. And then finally, we just got a few kind of implementation considerations at the end. So things around like timelines, the award, if you're approaching it as a MAT or a local authority compared to a single school. We'll kind of talk through all of that at the end. So please do feel free to pop questions in the chat box throughout the presentation. And we're also going to be sharing links throughout the session to specific research reports or different parts of the hub. So I will be sharing it on my screen, but please do feel free to open the screen on your own computers and have a little look through that as well. I have been kindly informed by our team here at the Sutton Trust that we have a hard finish just before 5 p.m. as we have another webinar at 5 p.m. for some of our programme students. So if we are looking like we're going to run over, I will have to do a hard stop there, but I will make sure that my email address gets out to all of you. So if you have any questions that haven't been answered, we can pick those up over email. So just check that there's no immediate questions before I start. No, we look good. Okay. So I imagine that if you have joined this webinar, you're already pretty familiar with our research on admissions. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I did want to start with a kind of overview about why we think admissions is so important and why we've invested so much time and so much of our resources into it. So why does admissions matter? I think, first of all, we start from the concept that access matters and that if you strip everything else away, what we believe in is that every child deserves an equal and fair chance to attend the best performing schools in their local area. We think that's especially important because we know how much outcome matters. We know that strong outcomes at Key Stage 4 have a lasting impact on life chances. And one of the ways that we can help children get positive outcomes is by making sure that they have equal access to the best schools. We think it's a really important lever for driving school improvement. It creates a more level playing field for schools and staff. And when we're thinking about this, we mean in terms of the amount of behaviour that they might be navigating in their school, the volume of children with SEND that they might have in their school, and kind of the resources that are needed to support those children. We know that recruitment and retention is harder in schools with high levels of disadvantage. And we know that it's harder, or it certainly has been harder under the previous Ofsted framework, to secure a really strong Ofsted report in more disadvantaged schools. So if we can level that playing field and have all schools take a fairer and more even distribution of their community, what we're doing is we're putting all schools on a more level playing field in which to do all those important things. It's a really achievable goal. School admissions and changing school admissions is a really cost-effective lever for meaningful change. It won't actually cost the sector anything to reform admissions, in terms of we're not asking for millions of pounds of investment. We're just asking for changes that will redistribute where pupil premium funding goes. So it's a really cost-effective lever for change. Its focuses on community and that kind of place-based model of building diverse intakes and more stronger representative schools. And it really speaks to empowering families. It supports families to make well-informed choices about the school that's going to best suit their children. And it drives system changes. It's a small change. Changing your admissions code or changing your approach to admissions might feel like a small thing, and it does take time for that impact to be felt, but it does have massive, long-lasting consequences in the end. And more than anything else, we would say that this is an urgent matter. You know, we as an organisation have been producing research on this for at least 20 years. And what we can tell you in that time is that the concept of social segregation hasn't improved. Actually, by some measures, it's gotten worse. It isn't going to go away on its own. We need to take deliberate, intentional action now to make a change. And then beyond all of that, and this was kind of a really sort of pleasant surprise for us, school admissions did feature in the school's white paper. And we know that there is going to be a consultation on the school admissions code in due course, but there's also in the white paper reference to how schools themselves can take more steps to be more inclusive with their intakes. And therefore, this is another good sort of reason for it to be on our radar as we move forward with the school's white paper. So what does the research actually say? So as I said, we've been looking into this for over 20 years, but we've had a really focused look on it since about 2020. We've produced several reports in that time period. And what it shows is that top performing secondary schools, and by top performing, what we mean is whatever the accountability measures are at that time. So in the report that we released this year on selective inclusion, we focused on Progress 8 and Attainment 8. When we did selective comps in 2024, we also looked at the EBAT measure. If you go further back to earlier selective comps, you will see things like 5 good GCSE grades. It doesn't really matter what accountability measure you look, the pattern is always the same. And what that is top performing schools don't take their fair share of pupils eligible for free school meals. And actually in March, when we looked at that situation for children with SEND, we saw the same pattern for children receiving SEND support. So what are some of the statistics behind that? So selective inclusion is our most recent report, which is probably what's brought you to the webinar today. But some statistics. So in the top performing schools, only 15% of pupils are eligible for free school meals, compared to 39% in the lowest performing. And what this means is that top schools take 25% fewer pupils eligible for free school meals than live in their catchment. So some of this, what this means is that some of this is due to kind of pockets of affluence across the country. But actually that effect is only really accountable for about a third of the social segregation we see. 2/3 of the social segregation we see in high performing schools is driven specifically by localised segregation. We'll talk a little bit more about what's driving that in a moment, but broadly speaking, this is driven by admissions policies which rely on proximity to the school, the cost of attending the school, and how well informed parents are as well. We also know that pupils with SEND are also less likely to attend top schools. So here we saw that the top schools have about 11.3% of their cohort receiving SEND support versus 14.6% nationally. And again, we see that top schools take 13% fewer children receiving SEND support than live in their catchment area. Now, there are some differences within the SEND cohort. So we didn't see any access barriers or gaps in access for children with EHCPs. It was exclusively with children that were receiving SEND support, and that will be largely down to the fact that EHCPs have an entirely different admissions pathway. The reasons for these gaps were slightly different for children with SEND compared to children that are disadvantaged, but the biggest reasons were schools' reputation for SEND provision and reputation for inclusion, and there was quite a big proportion of this was accounted to different approaches to behaviour, and parents with SEND perhaps preferring one end of the behaviour policy spectrum to another. We also found that 41% of school leaders think that some schools proactively discourage applications from children with SEND. And then the final element of that research was looking at what happens for those children that are both free school meals and have SEND. And here we see that the challenge in accessing those top schools compounds. So top schools took 36% fewer children eligible for free school meals and receiving SEND support than live in their catchment. So that group of children that have both disadvantages were the hardest hit in terms of access to high performing schools. And actually what we found is within the SEND cohort, those children that were receiving SEND support but did not have free school meals, there were absolutely no gaps in access for them. And so what this tells us is that the gap in admissions for children with SEND is driven entirely by their socioeconomic status. So their socioeconomic status is a really profound element of a child's educational experience. And just to flag some of the more specific details, all of this is in our selective inclusion report, so you will be able to go and look at this yourself. But this is just to show the sort of scale of the issue. Here we've got the size of the FSM gap compared to their local catchment. So, and the dark blue are progress 8 and the light blue are attainment 8. So that we can see the biggest gaps are experienced by those children that are both eligible for free school meals and receiving SEND support. We can see that there are no gaps in access for those with EHCPs and no gaps in access for those who are not free school meals but receiving SEND support. We found a couple of different things over the years, but some of the kind of big correlations that we've spotted across our research reports is that social segregation tends to be correlated as well as with high performing schools, but also with faith schools, smaller MATs and standalone academies, converter academies, and regionally, it tends to be worst in the Northeast, the Northwest, and Yorkshire and the Humber. And that is a big shift. 10 years ago, social segregation was most seen in London, but that has really shifted over sort of recent years. So why is this social segregation happening? So it's a really complex ecosystem of reasons, and you will see as you look and engage with the Fair School Admissions resources that, complex situations require complex bespoke solutions, and hopefully that will play out in the resources to support you. But the biggest key reason is to do with housing and the housing market. And what we will have all seen this over our career, schools that are performing well, both by Ofsted and their exam outcomes, become oversubscribed, and that drives demand for places in that school. That then has a knock-on effect on the housing market. So we have got, quite famous anecdotal evidence of that. So for example, Reach Academy, after that received its Ofsted outstanding, there was a piece of land next to it that had already been bought up to turn into housing. And then that was marketed almost exclusively as being the way to get access to that school. And what we've found in our research over the years is that houses near a high performing school attract a premium of around 20% compared to other houses in that area. And what this isn't itself a problem, it becomes a problem when we look at our admissions policies, because most of us as schools, around 88% of schools, choose to use proximity to the school, either through whoever lives closest or through catchment areas, as the main way to decide who gets to go to that school. And so that then all feeds into the housing market. Another issue is cost of high performing schools. So 56% of working class families say that hidden costs affect their school choices. And this can be things like extensive uniform requirements or a really high expectations around extracurricular or equipment lists, etc., etc. There are also challenges with how well informed parents can be around making school admission choices. So here we have to remember that 1 in 6 adults in the UK is functionally illiterate, which means that they can get by and they can engage with texts on content that's familiar to them. But if it is an unfamiliar setting, for example, an admissions policy, they won't be able to understand what that document is about. Now, I must have looked at hundreds of admissions policies over the last few years, and what I have usually found is that most admissions policies have a reading age of an undergraduate degree level. So admissions policies themselves are really difficult to understand, and that makes it difficult for parents to know what their choices are. But also around that kind of idea of information, is working class families tend to be less well informed when making school choices. Our research shows that they tend to use fewer evidence sources when they're making their decision, and they use different evidence sources. So they're more likely to talk to friends and neighbours about kind of local reputation of a school. Whereas more affluent parents are more likely to look at the Ofsted report, to sort of do a deep dive into the website, look at the policies, that kind of thing. So if we are not shouting from the rooftops everything we will do to support families, they aren't going to know about it. As I've said, there is a perception element to this around different schools having different reputations for provision and inclusion, and there are also deterrents within the system as well. We know that there are schools that proactively discourage children from attending them. This is the kind of last bit of the research that I'm going to talk about before we move on to a bit more of the solution. Another report we did looked at social selection on the map, and we have a dashboard that I'll show you shortly where you can go and look at your school and the schools in your area. And this one looks specifically at outcomes of different local authorities. So what this research showed, broadly speaking, and I encourage you to read it yourself, on a school by school basis, there's a very strong correlation between individual school performance and the size of what we call the FSM gap. And by FSM gap, I mean their FSM cohort compared to the FSM cohort of their community. So if they have a positive gap, that means they recruit more children for free school meals than live in the community. If it's a negative gap, it means they are recruiting too few children eligible for free school meals. And so we can see on a school by school basis, there is clearly a correlation. If, however, you zoom out and look at it from a local authority level, we see something quite different. And what we see here is that the level of social segregation was not correlated with outcomes at Key Stage 4. And what this means is if we all intentionally moved to a more socially diverse sets within our schools, we're unlikely to see any significant change overall in our Key Stage 4 outcomes. But what we will see potentially is that there is a correlation in the size of the gap, the attainment gap. So in local authorities with high levels of social segregation, there are bigger gaps in achievement in English and maths at GCSE. And in local authorities that are more diverse and more mixed, that gap is smaller. So although overall outcomes there's no correlation, there is when you look at the gap. And that gap is driven by underperformance of disadvantaged children. So what that tells us is that disadvantaged children do perform better in more socially diverse settings. So I'm just going to jump around a little bit off of the screen here and show you a little bit of the Fair School Admissions Hub, and then we're going to kind of jump between the slides a little bit. So this is our main hub. Everything on our hub is free to access, and we really encourage you to make the best use of it possible. You'll see on the first page, there's a little bit of kind of scene setting and talking about what we think about fair admissions. There's the benefits of changing the system. And then here, there are currently 2, soon to be 3, that was supposed to be on there today, 3 videos that summarise everything that we already know about fair school admissions. So the first video is about the research, which I've just talked you through. The second video is about 5 quick wins that you can make. And then the third video will be talking a little bit about policy. So if you're sat there thinking, okay, I'm kind of on board, but I need to bring my staff with me, or I need to bring my governors with me, those videos should be really helpful. They're kind of 5 minutes or less each, ways for you to start engaging in that concept. There are also 6 podcast episodes here. Each one of these podcast episodes is an interview with a school or multi-academy trust leader who has made significant changes to their approach to admissions already. So they're normally no more than 20 minutes. They're available on Spotify as well. So they're quite nice ones to have a little listen to, see what other school leaders have done. They talk really openly about their journeys, what was easy, what was hard. What did parents think? What did staff think? So if you're thinking about kind of implementation, like what is the actual tangible change to make, these are a really great start. And then there's a few other kind of written up case studies underneath as well, highlighting some other schools that are doing a great job and other areas that are doing well. And I think, yeah, and then there's a few bits here around other bits of research. So that's the main page on the hub to get us started. So that is our research. What I want to talk to you now is about the evidence base for which our solutions and our policy stance is embedded on. So, Admissions Not Impossible is our report that was released in April, and it's kind of an overview of everything we think about admissions. So, it encompasses all the research we've done over the last 20 years. It also has the findings and the lessons we've learned from working with over 100 schools in the last 2 years to review their approach to admissions. So, we've worked with a combination of single schools. We've worked with some multi-academy trusts to sort of implement change across the trust. We've also worked with some local authorities. And this report kind of encompasses everything we've learned about what works, what doesn't work, what are the barriers. We also have done lots of roundtables over the years to understand the context. We've done some specific teacher polling as well. So all of that is kind of, I say summarised, it's quite a long report, but it's all summarised in that report. That report also features what we're calling our framework for fair school admissions. Now, something that's really important for us to communicate with you today is we know that truly fair admissions cannot come from schools alone. We know that there needs to be significant government shift on this issue as well, but there are lots of things that schools and maths colleges, local authorities can already be doing as well. So within our report, we have this framework of 3 key themes, which are strategic direction, a key admissions policy change, and taking a wider view of admissions. This is our summary version. There is a more detailed version as well. And we kind of talk through all the different things that the 2 key stakeholders need to do to collaborate to improve this situation. So it's another really good place to start if you want to have a read of it and think, what is the evidence base? What are we saying? And what are the changes that need to be made? Broadly speaking, for schools and maths, the key changes that we would encourage you to take, first of all, care about admissions, which sounds like a really weird thing because you're obviously all here, but there is a significant challenge with school admissions that it's just not on the radar of school leaders. We know that school admissions policies only need to be reviewed every 7 years. You could be a head teacher for decades, and if you move schools, you may never be at a school in that year when the policy needs to be changed. So there are some schools that review it every year and they think about it a lot, but there are other schools that never think about it. So actually having it as part of your culture and moral purpose is really important. Have people responsible for it, have a member of senior leadership team think about it, have a member of your governance, and annually review it. And I'm going to show you how to do that with our resources. In terms of a key policy change, there are lots of things you can do to your policy. If I was going to tell you to do one thing, I would ask you to consider introducing a pupil premium priority in your school. And again, we'll talk through that. And then I would also say, in terms of the wider view, keep the cost of attending your school down, make sure information is screamed at your parents, so make it really obvious what support you can offer, and think about some of those smaller innovative approaches to admissions as well, such as reviewing catchment areas or looking at nodal points. There's a lot you can do. So to help you with all of that is our online Fair School Admissions Pledge. So this is, again, a completely free to access online module that talks you through everything. There are 8 lessons in the CPD module, and I will show you how to access them. But just sort of broadly to get us started, the first 2 lessons are kind of the explore stage. And just to say, each lesson has a video, which is me talking over some PowerPoint slides. And then there are document libraries of resources to help you enact what the video is talking about. So it's very much written as a kind of, school leaders are very busy and they need help accessing and actually making changes. So it's video content to teach and then resources to do. So the first one is understanding and establishing your starting point. So using data to understand if your school is socially diverse or if it is contributing to social segregation. And then the second lesson is reviewing your overall approach. So here we do what's called a fair access review. So it's a kind of a diagnostic review, and we talk you through all the steps and all the data that you'll need, lots of questions to help you understand where are your strengths and areas to develop in terms of admissions. Then you move on to preparing an action plan. So we talk through a model for an action plan, what kind of actions you might want to consider. We talk about the objective strategy tactic model. So that's all put aside for you. And then there's a delivery stage. So here we've got 4 lessons. So first of all, we've got ideas for actions around cost, accessibility and communication. So I've kind of pulled the most popular ideas and actions that our 100 pledge schools have done. So like 10 ideas for reducing cost, 10 ideas for improving information, 10 ideas for communication. So there's a whole host of ideas for you there. So you can kind of cherry pick what will work for your setting. Then there are 2 lessons looking specifically at policy changes. So there's a whole lesson on pupil premium priority. I know there's some people on the webinar today that have introduced a pupil premium priority, so they'll be aware that the options are endless for how you implement that. So that can make that tricky. So we've walked through kind of the different elements of how you might introduce that, the decisions you need to make, the different quotas you might want to consider. Then we've got a lesson on different policy changes. So we talk about fair banding, marginal ballots, nodal points and other things. And then there's also a lesson on how to run an admissions consultation. So the process that you need to go through to make sure you get that bit right. And then there's loads of resources in that lesson as well, template letters and presentations and other bits and pieces to help you write and run a really strong and positive consultation. And then the last lesson is about when admissions works. So advice on preparing your school for different cohorts and what sort of things you might want to change. So let's go and have a little look at that on the hub. And again, you might want to do this with me. But when we go onto the main page, you will find that there is access our resources to make change. You click through there. And then this is our page that's got all your kind of actiony or doing things resources. So we'll replace this button with a link to today's webinar, so you'll be able to watch it back. And then we've got some kind of key things that you might want to do. And then we have the course page. So if we click through here, this will take you through to our Fair School Admissions course page. Now, I've already finished it, so it's maybe not ideal, but you'll be able to come through. There's a little welcome video that talks you through the research again. And then here are your 8 lessons. So if we took, for example, running admissions consultations, you will see that there is a video to watch, and then there's a load of resources that you can download and use and hopefully be of real help to you. So that's the pledge. There is a certificate you can download at the end as well, which has got Sutton Trust branding on it. So you can use that as part of your kind of delivery system as well. Now, one of the other particular resources I wanted to show you, which live on the main hub. Oh, I mean, I'm quite impressed that I've got as far as I have without making a mistake, to be honest. Let's go back. So 2 other resources that might be particularly helpful. So the first one is the Pupil Premium Admission Simulator. So this isn't a perfect science, and please don't use this and think, oh, the Sutton Trust said that I will get 12 pupils eligible for free school meals if I do this. It's a guide. And one of the issues with admissions is that, it is a bit of a gamble in some cases. Like, we can make these changes to our admissions policies and we're not quite sure if it's going to have the impact that we want. And because there are lots of different ways to introduce a pupil premium priority, you can do unlimited or limited, you can do quotas, inside catchment, outside catchment, different distancing. There's so many different choices with it. It can feel quite overwhelming. You're not sure if you're making the right choices. So here, this tool is designed to help you do just that. You start by putting in typically how many applicants you get and your PAN, so how many can you take? And then just go through and put some, broadly speaking, typically, how many EHCPs do you get? How many plaques and lacs? How many siblings? How many pupil premium? How many children of staff? Now, you can add other categories in if you want to, and you can also add some information in about your pupil premium cohort. That will generate for you an applicant pool. And so you can see here, these are all the different applicants and the kind of different categories they fall into. There are some advanced settings you can play with, e.g. pupil premium. The children close to your school, are they more or less likely to be pupil premium? There's different things you can play around with to get it as close to your setting as possible. Once you've done that, you can then come down and play around with different kinds of admissions policies. So you can take things off the list. So you might choose not to prioritise siblings, and instead you're going to put a pupil premium priority on instead. You can then play around with different kinds of pupil premiums. So you can change where it is on the policy. You can put it higher or lower. You can say, is it going to be an unlimited priority or is it going to be a limited priority? Am I going to put a quota in? And if so, what's that quota going to be? Am I going to say 20% of places are reserved for pupil premium or 10% of places. So you can have a real play around with kind of different elements there. You can also have a little play around with catchments. Do I want it to be open? Do I want it to be linked to a certain distance? You can play around with different things. And from that, it will generate a predicted intake for you. So you can play around with different quota sizes, different priorities, inside catchment, outside of catchment, all of those things, and it will give you an idea of what kind of impact that will have on your cohort. It's not an exact science, but I think it's a really incredible tool to help you, particularly if you've got nervous governors or you want to kind of, as part of your consultation, that you're not making a blind guess in the dark. It's something that will give you some idea of the impact that you're having. So you go back. So I really encourage you to look at the hub. Oh, I tell there's one other resource actually that I didn't yet show you, so I will show you that now, which is our dashboard. So the dashboard, every school, every state secondary school should be on our dashboard. And this shows you, so you can look at your schools. So once it loads, I'm a Kent girl, right at the bottom of Kent. So I'm going to go all the way down and I can look at the schools in my area, and it gives you red dots means that they are not recruiting enough children eligible for free school meals. Green dots means that they are. And you can hover over them and it gives you information about that school. You can also do different filters. So you can have grammar schools or not grammar schools. You can look at high performing or low performing schools. We've also got on here something called an adjusted progress rate measure. So our adjusted progress rate is an alternative methodology for calculating progress rate that looks more closely at the context of the school. So it takes your region, your level of disadvantage into account, and it generates a reflective progress rate, bearing in mind the context and the challenge that you're operating within. And we've also got some EHCP and SEND data on there as well. So if you haven't been in and had a look at your school, please do. And we do have two data sets in there now. We have a 2023-2024 data set and a 21-22 data set. So you can have a look to see if there are any changes over the last few years. Okay. So I might just have a quick, no, we'll do everything, we'll do questions at the end. So some implementation things to think about then. If you're looking at all of that and thinking, oh, this is actually looking quite interesting, I want to know more about this or what happens next. So what we envision is that you will go and complete the online learning module. That will talk you through the key processes of reviewing your school, understanding if you're part of the problem or if your school is not. You would then do a review of your admissions approaches. So you'll identify what parts of our admissions approach are working well and which bits are not working so strongly. You'll then make an action plan for how to change that. Now that might involve reducing cost, sharing information more widely, or engaging with parents. It might include changing your admissions policy, and we've got all the resources to help you do that. Once you've done your action plan and you've started to implement that, we really want to celebrate that and recognise the hard work you're putting in to being a truly inclusive school. And so to help with that, we have the Fair School Admissions Award. And again, I know there are some award winners in the webinar with us today. We do 3 levels of award depending on the amount of change you've made and how far along you are in your journey. Broadly speaking, bronze winners are schools that have started to address things like cost of attending their school or information sharing, that kind of bag of things. Schools that are making substantial policy changes, so have introduced a pupil premium priority or have stopped doing something. So for example, one of our policy winners used to do aptitude testing for 10% of their places, and then they realised that there was no pupil premium children within that cohort, that no pupil premium children weren't gaining access through their aptitude places, so they stopped doing it. So if you've made some sort of policy change to improve admissions to your school, then we're looking at the Silver Award. And then the Gold Award is for schools that, have really done it all. They've gone cost and policy, or it might be that it's a multi-academy trust or a local authority where a group of schools have all gone in together and committed to collective action, because Individual schools can make significant change, but it's when a whole community comes together that you will see the most significant changes. So in order to apply for an award, it's on our website in the resource section. It's a pretty brief form, but you will need to fill in a bit of information about your school, your context, and you will need to attach your action plan or your admissions policy. If you're sat here and you're like, Charlie, I already do all of that stuff, please get in touch. We're very happy to award schools that are already demonstrating great practice, even if they haven't gone through the pledge. So some timeline considerations for you. If you are interested in completing this work and getting a Fair School Admissions Award for the next academic year, so you want a 2026-2027 Fair School Admissions Award, that is entirely possible to get that done ready for September 2026. What you will need to do is you will need to go on, sign up to the pledge, work through the course material, and be at a point where you've written your action plan in September. And the contents of that action plan need to be applicable for the student recruitment that you're doing in September 2026. So these sorts of things could be changing our open evening presentation to include slides on how we can support disadvantaged children and children with SEND. It could be changing the uniform so that the uniform is cheaper. It could be having a stand at our open evening event that informs parents of their transport options and helps parents to apply for free school transport. You'll kind of get a sense of what those actions could be when you go through the course. So as long as you get an action plan with that content in it submitted to me in September 2026, I will be able to turn around your Fair School Admissions Award ready for the academic year so you can use it as part of your recruitment for next year. But please do bear in mind that it's only possible at that point to achieve a bronze award unless you are already a school that has a pupil premium priority that I don't know about, and then get in touch and we can talk about that separately. If you're sat here thinking, I'm happy to take my time and I'm going to spend the next school year like really unpicking this work carefully and kind of bringing my school with me and doing a really thorough change management program with it. Or if you're sat here thinking, I'm really interested in doing a policy change and I'm really interested in bringing in a pupil premium priority, then we're really looking at a 2027-2028 Fair School Admissions Award. So that basically means you've got the whole year to do the course and write your action plan and be ready to implement things for 2027-2028. What I would say is if a policy change is on your radar, ready for 2027, you will need to do that policy change in the winter of 2026. I will share these slides because everything in admissions is such a long lead time. It takes so long to change everything. It can be, you're always thinking several years ahead of time. But if a pupil premium priority is something you're interested in, or fair banding, or marginal ballots, or nodal points, or anything like that, you need to be working towards a winter consultation period. So I think that opens up in October and runs through to January. Now, I thought it would just be helpful to give you an idea of some of the data that you will need to do the review in the on the online course, because this is actually the bit that can take a little bit of time, is collecting all the data you need. Sorry, so you will need information about free school meal percentages within your schools. I imagine that most of you have got SIMS or Bromcom or Arbor or something like that, where you can go onto a dashboard and get the FSM data for your school. There is also obviously the dashboard, and there is links to Adaki and things like that that will help contextualize your FSM numbers. Other things that you're likely to need. We do ask you to calculate the cost of attending your school across year 7. So there is an Excel document in the course that helps you work out every kind of expense that a parent might need to make to kind of get through the first year at your school. So you might want to get things like a uniform list or kind of uniform supplier costs and things like that to help you with that. We also ask you to think about notice periods for key expenses, and that really is thinking about families on universal credit will be budgeting month to month, probably quite tightly budgeting. So if you're asking for additional expenses, how much time do you tend to give people? So you want to think about that as well. You'll also want to look at like promoting support and communicating clearly. You will need things like your prospectus, your pupil premium and send strategy. You need to have a look at your website. You might want to do a bit of parent voice. I really encourage the use of reading age calculators here. So Word does have an inbuilt editor which will tell you the reading age of the document, but there's loads online as well. There are some links to that in the course. And of course, you will need your admissions policy. And if you are considering making any kind of policy change, whether you are a MAT or not, particularly if you're a MAT, coordinate early with your local authority and kind of have a conversation about what the options are and how they can support you with that. And then finally, I wanted to talk about different ways that multi-academy trusts can engage with the pledge. I'm saying multi-academy trust here, but this is true of local authorities as well. If you're a standalone school doing the pledge, it's fairly simple. Your vice principal, assistant principal, or head will work through the course, write the action plan, submit the action plan to me, and I will give you an award. With MATs, it's a little bit more complicated. There are options depending on how your MAT works, because obviously not all MATs work the same. So one option is to have a central point of contact for your MAT. So every secondary school in the MAT engages with the pledge, but it's led by a single person. So a single central leader does the course, coordinates all the information, does a single review across the schools, and produces a single action plan, which they then disseminate across the schools. If that's the case, what we will do when that award comes in is we will award the MAT. Another option is that every secondary school engages from the MAT engages individually. So one leader from each school does the course and individual action plans are written. If that's the case, we will write awards for the individual schools as well as the MAT. We have worked in cluster models, so particularly for bigger MATs, they sometimes prefer to work in regional clusters. So a group of secondary schools within the MAT decide to commit to the pledge. One person does that work and then the award goes to the MAT cluster. Or it might be within your MAT, and this was certainly like Greenshaw, for example. They had one school go through as a kind of pilot, and one school have introduced a pupil premium priority, and they're kind of seeing how that goes. So you can just have, you don't have to engage as a whole MAT or a whole local authority. You can have individual schools within that. So then the final two resources to share with you are on the Take Action page. So if you've listened to everything we've said and you're still not sure if this is right for you, at the bottom of our Take Action page is a reflective activity that you might want to do with senior leaders or governors. It kind of talks you through what to do. And you kind of like audit your school against best practice. So this is what typical practice looks like. This is what best practice looks like. And you work through and you decide where does your school fall on that. And it just gives you an idea of, well, actually, maybe there is a little bit more we could be doing, or, you know, or maybe we're all green all the time and we are best practice in everything, in which case maybe you don't need the Fair School Admissions Pledge. The final set of resources are if you are not the decision maker. So if you are here as a local authority and you need to engage your head teachers, if you're here as a governor and you need to engage your senior leaders, or if you're here as a member of staff and you want to engage people, there are documents for each one of you to kind of help you, first of all, understand the role that you can play. So what can you do to raise awareness of admissions? And then there are resources that you can share with your schools as well. So that is everything, I think. Good. So let's have a little look at the chat. If you've got any questions, this is the best time to pop them in the box. And we'll just give everyone a couple of minutes. And Sophie, if there are any questions that have come through that I can't see. Oh, there is a question in the Q&A box, which means I'm not looking at the right thing. It's where technology fails us. Ah, got it. Okay. So this question is, when looking at the evidence of the top performing schools, is there any data on the difference between selective and non-selective schools? I work at a grammar school and obviously we have an entrance test as part of our admissions policy. We do want to do more, but not sure if the focus is on non-selective comps. Excellent. So absolutely, Peter. Yes, there is. We do have research on selective schools as well. So in social selection on the map, we do look at selective schools, and you'll be able to go onto the dashboard and look at the difference between the two. We do know that there is profound issues with access for pupil premium children to selective schools. Um, so do go and have a look at that. The one recommendation I'm going to make to you is one of the podcast episodes, because one of our podcast episodes is with a selective school. It's with Reading School, who are one of our Gold Award winners, and they've talked about all of the different things they've done to improve access to their school. So that includes different kinds of testing, contextualized pass marks, different kinds of exam arrangements. They've moved their test to the summer rather than the autumn, so that parents that can use summer holidays to do like max tutoring. So they've kind of taken that out. So I really encourage you to have a look at that podcast. There's some really good recommendations there. Form for the completion of an award, absolutely. Let me show that to you now. So that is on the resource page. So I'll tell you what, we'll just start from the beginning and we'll work through it together. So we go on to the main Fair School Admissions Hub and we scroll down to access our resources to make change. And then down there is apply for a Fair School Admissions Award. So you can apply for the award here, and there are some FAQs there. I'm sure you're all very, just in case anyone's thinking about applying for their award today, please hold fire, just because I know that in the next couple of days we're changing the form. So it will just be easier if you can just hold off for a few days. If you've applied before, it's the same form as last year. Yeah. So next question. Yeah, so governors and trustees, absolutely. So do you have time to say what governors and trustees might be able to do? So I think, first of all, the first thing to do is just to raise it with your senior leadership team. So have a look at our resources, find your school on the dashboard, find out if your school is part of the problem, and that gives you really strong evidence to take to your head teacher. You are, of course, welcome to do the module as well. So you can upskill yourself and learn about the different things that governors and trustees can help schools to do. For me, governors and trustees are strategic leads and have strategic oversight of their school. So one of the documents has got a list of questions that governors can ask their school leaders. So it themes that you've got questions around cost, questions around admissions policies, questions around that. That's all in our resources. So you can present the data through our dashboard. You can upskill yourself and really understand the context through the module. And then on one of the lessons of the module, there is a list of questions that you can take to your leaders and ask them what are they doing to kind of help steer them more towards that direction. If you are the pupil premium lead, this can be especially powerful as well. And then another question from Rosanna. The data on the dashboard is incredibly useful. Do you have anything that's more up to date? I'm also from a selective school and changed our admissions policy recently. Oh, Rosanna, I wish we did. So that data was pulled this March, in March 2026, and that is currently the most up-to-date data we have, because data takes so long to work through the system. And then we have to get permission from the Office of National Statistics. There's a massive lag with data. So that data is pretty new for us. You'll be able to see your own internal free school meal data, so you'll be able to have a little play around with yourself. It's unlikely that your levels of FSM in your community have changed significantly. So the dashboard should have your catchment FSM rate on it. If it doesn't, I have that information. So send me an email and I will share that information with you. That is probably less likely to change over time. So it's a good benchmark to compare other things to. Okay, I think that's everything. So we'll make sure that we follow this up with just a quick email, and then you'll have my email address too. This is still a big part of my job day to day is supporting and advocating for admissions. So please do not hesitate to reach out. I'll be very happy to help any of you. And if you have any problems with the hub, please let me know as well. And if you have any successes, I would love to hear about that too. So I will let you go, and Sophie has got an entire 11 minutes before the next webinar. Thank you so much for your time today, everyone. Thank you for coming.